the Overman Warrior Podcast.
Hi, Rich Hoffman here. Lots of interesting things to talk about in the context of human history, which is one of my favorite topics. I talk about the sites of archaeology and anthropology a lot because I'm very fascinated by it. When I was in school, that was the archaeology was what all the career counselors were telling me that I should do. I should pursue it because I had an unusual interest in it at a very early age, very early, and for who knows what reasons, some of my earliest thoughts were on these kinds of topics. So the belief was all the school counselors thought I was going to grow up and become an archaeologist of some kind or some kind of scientist, and I like to fight too much to live a peaceful existence doing digs and uncovering the past. But I admire people who do a lot. It's just not my cup of tea. I like chaos and mayhem way too much to have a civilized occupation like that. So, but to that effect, I just picked this up because I just read David Flynn's book. Now, I remember when this book came out in the late 2000s, 2010 time range, 2012. It's about 2012. Temple at the Center of Time. I thought it was kooky. That's an unfair word, but I'll have to say, compared to where mainstream opinions are, this is kooky. And I'll get into that in a minute. But as the internet has given people a chance to talk more, and as decentralization of established sciences made by people who don't like a lot of chaos in their life, that like to write their textbooks and then publish them and then build on acquired knowledge and then take previous assumptions and always continue to go down that path. Well, we've done that for a long time, and I think it's time to pull the plug on the idea that we really understood historical narratives, especially coming out of the archaic period and the evolution of understanding. We tend to measure things based on what we have known, like the Romans settled London. The Romans, we think of them as ancient history, but the Romans, in my view, are very recent newcomers that inherited things and built society right before we did. And the Western civilization rose out of that, and here we are. And we're trying to establish, a modern view of really the same governing principles that Greek and Roman society established. And I think there's a lot of good stuff to come out of those societies, Greek and Roman societies. I love the work of Aristotle. I love the work of Socrates and Plato, and I love the contemplations of Atlantis that came from Plato, and the evolution of Egyptian society that migrated from fallen Atlantean ties. I'm talking about these things very openly because I think you have to go back and try to understand what's before what we knew, what survived in the written word, and we tend to measure that in a few thousand years in the past, to the rise of the Temple of Solomon in the biblical periods that were well chronicled now. I will have to say, I was talking to my good friend, Senator George Lang, at an event, and I was walking him out to his car, and he showed me the Bible that they gave him. I really love that Bible. He showed me the Bible they gave him when he became, I guess, a member of the Senate, and they brought these Bibles. Somebody, I don't know who it was, brought all the members of the legislature these beautiful, big, thick, big study Bibles that are kind of leather-bound, soft-cover Bible. And it's got engravings of his name and everything on them, and it's really quite something. And what a lot of people don't know about George Lang, he's a very serious senator, and he's a pro-business guy, and he keeps it pretty simple. Pro-capitalism, give people upper mobility, and do good work to give people options out there in life. What they don't know about him, and this is probably the part that he and I spend most of the times we talk about, this is what we care about most, and that's ancient history, ancient civilizations. And we were joking as he showed me his Bible. Fantastic Bible. It's really beautiful. And I'm encouraged to know that at the State House in Ohio that there's Bibles being passed out to people. I don't know that it's not government run. I think it's a private enterprise that makes them for members of the legislature. And that's a great foundation for creating law, biblical context. Book of Judges, all the religious foundations that evolved off the Bible are interesting, but it's good for establishing government. So as we were talking about it, I said, this is the best thing we have to understanding what was burned and lost in the Library of Alexandria, or any other library that's been destroyed through time and turmoil, and why we only have a very small vision into our historic past. But there's a lot more going on, of course, than that, and the Bible gives you a hint to it. Because what's survived over time, obviously, is a reflection on the wall of much more advanced cultures, things that didn't quite make the cut or survive the erosion of time. And when I talk about that, I have this wonderful book. My kids were recently at the British Museum, and I'd been there and bought some books, and there was a continued series from these guys, and books they put out at the British Museum, and this is one that they picked up for me that I wanted to get but didn't get because I didn't want to. It's heavy, so I didn't want to lug it all over London and then through the airports because I already had a lot of other books. So they picked this one up for me. This is Aerial Atlas of Ancient Britain, and in it there's lots of pictures of these structures that were built, and I will profess these are the same orientations, these are the same constructs, mound constructs, circular ditches, effigies, an obsession with alignments to stars at a very ancient time. And you can just go through this book and see so much reverence that, and it's all over the Ohio River Valley where I live. Same culture. And when I actually saw Stonehenge myself, this is not a culture that is unique to the area. It's not just about Druids. It's even probably older than the Druids. There's all the different sites all over Britain. And then there's a picture of Stonehenge on the back. And this circle, just to make that circle, is astonishing. So when you start getting into crop circles and things that end up in the ground that are near these kinds of things, there's all kinds of mysterious elements that are happening. And we don't really understand it. And I've been talking recently, and I think it's a key to a lot of stuff, is the, archaeologically speaking, is the site discovered in Florida of the Wendover people, dated back to 8,000, 7,000, 8,000 years ago, deep in the Archaic period, and we know a lot about them because the well-preserved cemetery it was found during a housing complex. And when you see some very sophisticated society like that, and forget about the large bones that they found there, I'm just talking about organized nature of their building a cemetery, being buried in a way that the bog preserved their bodies so well, even to the point of preserving the brain tissue. Egyptians try to preserve bodies for all kinds of reasons that are very mysterious. So what if, once you're dead, what good's your body? How does that play in dimensional time and space? And this idea that is very ancient that our history has not captured correctly. And what David Flynn, and again, I said I read this because this was originally a kooky book, but I'm admiring the work of the Timothy Alberinos of the world, and I thought if he's this smart and he's talking about all these great things, then and he thinks so much of David Flynn, and I enjoyed reading Cydonia, The Secret History of Mars so well that this is the other book David Flynn wrote just before he died. These guys are always dying of mysterious illnesses way too soon in life, mysterious cancers. So it happens to a lot of people who start pecking at this kind of subject matter. And I call this a book of genius. It's written by somebody who was really seeing patterns well behind the historic narrative, and it's jaw-dropping in its considerations. And is it crazy? I don't think it's crazy at all. I think he's circling the drain on a deeper understanding. And what we're talking about here is, for reference, the London Stone, which everybody walks by and no one really understands why it was there. It looks like it predated Roman occupations. Probably goes back to the Wendover people, the 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years ago, probably older than that even. And then when you start looking how, and what he picked up on is the math, the Newton math, the contemplations of how we build cities. And you trace back some of the major cities on planet Earth back to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. If you strip away everything humans have built, and you have these unique little rocks staged all over the world, and you had this global civilization of large people who probably came from other places in the solar system or the galaxy itself and settled here, just like people settle anywhere. They came from somewhere else and they settled, and they brought with them culture and understandings and a desire to understand measuring time and space. And as I've talked about all these ground markers, these Stonehenge type things, the mounds that we have in North America, and of course in Britain and all over Europe and all over China and everywhere, we have not studied these things correctly because we set our depth of understanding history too shallow. And going back to that book, when my friend George Lang showed me his beautiful Bible that he carries around in the back seat of his car and with him everywhere, which I'm impressed with. I think he and I have an idea of, not that you throw out ideas of religion. Religion's important, but it's a means to deeper understanding. And I think when you're so interested in the remnants of what ancient civilization is trying to tell you, that you're carrying the one of the best preserved remnants of that in the backseat of your car, it says a lot about you. Now, I carry my Bibles around with me everywhere. I never not have them because I'm always rifling through for references. Because as you contemplate this kind of stuff, and David Flynn was very scripturally proficient, as is Timothy Alberino. These guys are taking UFO lore and cryptid speculations because some of these things don't really exist outside your dimensional time and space, but we perceive them in ways that we might learn to or might have a biological tendency to, but it's not scientifically logical on the rules of how we build our society. But that doesn't mean that we build our society correctly on the right terms. And what's so interesting about this book is that it's not just about measuring spaces on Earth, but about measuring time. And one thing that he started checking on time-wise is proximity to like the city of London and the London Stone, which is excessively mysterious, and the years of different events happening, and as if all time was known upon the building of those cities as foundations. Paris, for instance, every street grid in Paris was measured from a spot in front of Notre Dame, and I know that because I stood on the spot. It's a very interesting place. And why that spot? Why did everything in Paris spiral out from in front of Notre Dame like that? And then when you see that hostile terrorists wanted to burn down Notre Dame, what kind of erasing of history are they trying to do? Just like burning down the Library of Alexandria and probably countless other hidden museums or libraries all over the earth. What is being concealed from us? And I think David Flynn's catching on to something when he's starting to plot what was at the cities before the city. What was at the Temple Mount before there was a temple built on it? Why did humans build a temple on it? Why did God say, go there, David, and buy the threshing floor and build the temple to me? But not by you, because you're too crazy and you've made a lot of mistakes. Make your son do it. And then his son built it, but he also built just across the valley monuments to some of his wives that he sacrificed grasshoppers to make them happy in worship of Moloch. So God wasn't all that happy. When you talk about the proximity of Mecca, the Kaaba stone in proximity to the Temple Mount, this is why the Temple Mount is the most contested piece of real estate on planet Earth. But is it because of religious problems, or is it because of the role that it plays in time and space and the measuring of it? And what does that measuring tell us if you're looking at the scope of the earth in the proper way? And then alignment to the stars. People opened up fortune cookies or apps on their phone to give them their horoscopes these days. What's my horoscope today? What sign was I born into? What's it tell me? Well, why do we believe that when you were born or where you were born and where you are in the earth has some sort of fate already predestined? We're talking about whether or not we have actual free will as human beings, or whether everything has been plotted for us. Because if you built cities on top of these spots in proximity to an entry point, which is Dome of the Rock in Israel, the desire to preserve and create, and even the war we're having right now with Iran, what does it all mean, and why is it necessary, and how do you define righteousness? How do you fight for righteousness if everything has already been established? If we're just following the script that's been written a long time ago, and we put cities on top of those things, or temples on top of those spots that have reverence that goes back many thousands of years. That's why I say that before you throw out rationality on a book like this, where somebody who's very intelligent is trying to connect the dots, and maybe you don't have all the puzzle pieces, but you're starting to get the edges, you have to kind of look back further than what we actually know and understand. And that goes back to why that archaeological site of the Wendover people is so important, and why I'm going to talk about it so extensively, because that's a hint. Religious idea. They buried their people with their heads craned back, looking west. Why? Why is all these things happening with directional indications? And why do we have these rocks set up all over the planet Earth? Why did they feel so compelled in ancient Britain to put these rocks up in circles and chronicle time in alignments to stars? And we speculate, but we haven't taken the next step, and that's to really apply true logic to it and put math to these things to really kind of reverse engineer the thinking of a time long lost. Before you had the civilizations we think measure things now came along and put upon all those things their own cultures that were probably had broken segments to them, and so then you end up with lost knowledge. And we need to really kind of go back and get that to understand what we're supposed to do in the future. But while we're having that discussion, we're actually talking about whether we all have free will or not, and whether everything we do is already predestined, and that the measuring of that destiny is laid out with the knowledge, almost a calendar mapped all over planet Earth and its proximity to other planets that hints at knowledge that we haven't even considered rationally, because we considered it too preposterous to even ask the question. And the evolution of this book over time, Temple at the Center of the World, I've always been pretty open to these things, but I looked at this at that time, 2008 to 2012 period. I looked at this as kind of way out there and reaching too far in speculation. But the thing is that time now has brought the evidence to these conclusions. And so David Flynn's getting a second look in a lot of circles, and he well should. And people like Timothy Alberino that are out there are helping make that happen. Next generation of these adventurous explorers and biblical supporters to kind of put a theological approach to discovery and archaeology, which I think is very healthy, because you're applying science to written literature and human considerations, and that gives you a good insight into what you need to be looking at next. But the evidence points us to an inevitability of a human lifespan that is not rooted in free will, but was laid out a long time ago, and the human race was trying to build monuments to chronicle that timeline so they could understand it over many lifetimes when things were going to happen and why, and how they get that original information. And to understand that, you have to understand religions of societies, not just assume they were hunters and gatherers, but they had sophisticated burial rituals, as the Wendover people presented. And when they bury themselves, preserve their bodies for some interesting reason, they obviously had science to know to do so. They weren't so primitive, and they were rooted in a culture that had deep understanding of these things. And why'd they crane their necks west is the big question. Why is there a London stone that was built in the middle of the road and London was built completely around it? Why do we measure all the streets and points around the earth? And how, if you apply those mathematics to the spot in front of Notre Dame Cathedral, what does that tell you about free will and the human race and how we build cities and what was there before? Why did we build a temple of great significance right on top of that strange rock where Abraham was supposed to sacrifice Isaac, and God told him to go there? What was there before any temple was built, before David bought the threshing floor? Why was that spot so important? And then the Kaaba stone in Mecca, and its proximity, its reverence to Islam, to how people worship it and the way they do. It's a rock. You have all these people out there worshiping stones and spots of geometric significance, rocks and stones from the ancient past, and they still have reverence today. But it's only hidden behind a layer of presumption that is keeping us from getting to what answers we need for the proper fulfillment of a healthy future. So I'm very interested in these topics, and I think this book, The Temple at the Center of Time, is significant, and I love having a culture where we can study these things and read these things, and I think David Flynn was knocking on the door of genius, and the path to understanding flows in the questions he's asking and the answers he's providing based on what you can know as we're uncovering the past, but we need to change our scope. And I think the Wendover people of Central Florida is one of those keys to doing so, understanding that time period, rewriting the archaic period, and then being honest about what that tells us about mound culture evolution in North America, and on the British Isles and elsewhere, what's it say about our eventual fate and our role in making that fate occur in a productive way, whatever that meaning is? We have, as thinking people, need to understand it. And that's why I've always had an interest in these things, and will likely always have an interest in them. And I appreciate anybody out there digging these things up so that we can sit around and contemplate what all that evidence means. And I think we're on a fast track to great understandings in the years to come that are going to be magnificent to behold. Anyway, it's Rich Hoffman here. Share, subscribe, make tomorrow a better day. If you haven't read my book, The Gunfighter's Guide to Business, I think you'll love it. Anyway, have a good day. See you later.
Thank you for listening.